Dr. Aris Thorne, a brilliant but troubled oncologist, stared at the holographic projection shimmering before him. It wasn't a tumor scan, but a visualization of the human body pulsing with crimson flares. Inflammation. This wasn't the localized beneficial reaction, the body's valiant defense against invaders, but a sinister, persistent crimson tide. It started small, a minor skirmish in the immune system, a redness, a touch of swelling, but when it lingers, morphs into a chronic systemic siege. The body's own defenses turn into the architects of its ruin. He had seen it countless times, the prolonged surge of cytokines, chemokines, and reactive oxygen species. This relentless bombardment, not unlike a toxic storm, eroded tissues, leaving behind a landscape ripe for disease. Unresolved infections and autoimmune war within, the insidious creep of obesity and metabolic syndrome, the omnipresent pollutants, the slow march of aging, and the gnawing teeth of chronic stress. All stoked this relentless fire. Each patient a unique battlefield, their individual triggers a bewildering enigma, and at the heart of it all, the ominous realization: chronic inflammation wasn't just a side effect, it was the driving force behind the most formidable of enemies: cancer. His current obsession, the case of Elias Vance, a former climate scientist now ravaged by a rare form of pancreatic cancer, was a stark reminder. Elias, like the planet, bore the scars of a relentless assault. The research piled high on his desk screamed the connection: chronic inflammation facilitating not only the initiation but the progression, metastasis, and even resistance to therapy. Elias's tumor microenvironment, a swirling cauldron of growth factors, cytokines, and proteolytic enzymes, was evidence enough. It was turning normal tissue into a tumor sanctuary. Chronic inflammation had warped his very cells, turning them into malignant assassins, and Elias was just another victim in a long line of casualties. Dr. Thorne felt a deep connection to this case, the insidious, invisible force attacking Elias. It felt like the very same one that was unraveling the world around him. The looming shadow of climate change hung over every one of his diagnoses. The relentless warming of the planet wasn't merely an environmental crisis, it was a physiological one. The toxic smog, the searing heat waves, the unsettling spread of infectious diseases, all were fueling the crimson tide. Elias, a man who once studied the delicate balance of ecosystems, was now being consumed by the consequences of its disruption. Dr. Thorne had to uncover the exact mechanisms that were linking climate change to his patient's suffering before they'd both be dragged under by the crimson tide. Thorne knew he had to delve deeper into the molecular battleground, the Tumor Citadel, he called it. Within its walls, chronic inflammation unleashed a storm of pro-tumor signals. Pathways like NF-κB, STAT3 and MAPK, usually protectors, were now twisted, driving cell survival, growth, and even the construction of new blood vessels, angiogenesis, that fed the tumor's relentless hunger. The body was actively creating the very environment for its own destruction. The immune system, designed to be an ally, had been turned. Tumor-associated macrophages, TAMs, once the cleanup crew, had been corrupted, switching into an M2 phenotype, aiding angiogenesis, silencing anti-tumor immunity. Myeloid-derived suppressor cells, MDSCs, joined the fray, an army of immunosuppressors shielding the cancer cells. Regulatory T cells, TREGs, became the guardians of the tumor, stifling the body's own defenses. The cytokines themselves were betrayers: Illinois, 6, TNF-A, and IL-1B, acting like the conductors of a malignant orchestra. Beyond these pathways, the insidious forces of oxidative stress had free rein. The reactive oxygen species, ROS, usually harmless byproducts of metabolism, became wrecking balls, shattering DNA, proteins, and lipids, triggering mutations and destabilizing the genome. Epigenetic modifications, like insidious code changes, twisted gene expression, allowing cells to bypass growth controls. Even the gut microbiome, once a faithful ally, had been corrupted, dysbiosis fueling inflammation and modulating the tumor's immune response. Thorne knew that if he could unravel the Tumor Citadel and the forces that supported it, he could finally stand a chance against the crimson tide. He sifted through epidemiological data, the whispers of the past. Patients with inflammatory bowel diseases, the relentless wars in the gut, were at far higher risk for colorectal cancer. Those battling rheumatoid arthritis, their own bodies turned against them, were more prone to other cancers. The elevated markers, C-reactive protein, CRP, interleukin-6, IL-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNFA, were red flags warning of impending doom. Obesity, the silent amplifier of inflammation, was a common thread, a dark omen of a body in distress. Clinical studies echoed the same dire message. The tumor microenvironment, saturated with inflammation, dictated behavior, invasiveness, metastasis, poor outcomes, shorter lifespans, resistance to therapies. All were symptoms of this sinister alliance. Even as medicine threw its best at the cancer, inflammation worked against it. It had become clear that if Dr. Thorne wanted to save his patients, he would have to wage war against inflammation itself. The connection to climate change was now glaring. Air pollution, the insidious fallout of industrial excess, triggered both pulmonary and systemic inflammation. The PM2.5 particles, microscopic invaders, ignited inflammatory pathways, paving the way for respiratory diseases and cancer. Heat waves, the cruel consequence of a warming planet, increased oxidative stress, inflaming vulnerable populations. The altered dynamics of infectious diseases fueled a cycle of chronic infection and persistent inflammation. The planet was sick, and its sickness was poisoning humanity. Thorne's team, including Dr. Anya Sharma, an environmental scientist, and Dr. Ben Carter, an immunologist, started work on an unprecedented approach. Their research shifted to the mechanisms linking climate change and inflammation to cancer, examining the consequences of this complex interaction. They developed comprehensive treatment protocols combining conventional cancer therapies with novel anti-inflammatory agents. Anya brought to the table the policy implications, developing frameworks to mitigate climate change and its influence on inflammation. Dr. Carter, on the other hand, sought to understand how to best manipulate the immune response, seeking a better understanding of the pathways activated in the tumor microenvironment. Their goal was clear: to intercept the crimson tide, to quell the inflammatory storm, and to create a world where medicine and the environment were allies. They envisioned a future where public health policies would promote a harmonious relationship between humans and their environment, where early detection and personalized therapies would help mitigate the effects of chronic inflammation and cancer, and where the planet itself could finally heal. As they dove deep into this mission, Dr. Thorne finally understood. The key wasn't just to fight cancer, it was to fight the forces that were creating it. The crimson tide was not invincible, and humanity still had a chance, however slim, to turn the tide of destruction